Hello, today is Tuesday, November 21st, 2017. I'm Joe Schmidt with TC2, and this is Staying Connected. One of the things we do at TC2 is advise clients on what suppliers they may want to consider for their communications need. Be it a network service provider or a wireless provider, maybe a cloud service provider or an OEM or a value-added reseller, maybe even an SD-WAN vendor. Our clients, they value the advice that we give because we usually have quite a bit of knowledge and experience with these service providers, and we understand what the supplier capabilities are. So when there's merger and acquisition activity in the communications industry, we take notice. And lately, there's been a lot to notice. I'm joined today by Jack Deal, one of TC2's Managing Directors. And we're going to take a look at some of the more important deals that will, and some that won't, be affecting the enterprise. Jack, it's good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here as well and discuss the changes taking place today in the supplier marketplace for network services and what large enterprise buyers need to know to help navigate this sea change.
All right, so first thing, the CenturyLink acquisition of Level 3 is now complete. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. A quick recap for everyone. Clear back in October of last year, CenturyLink announced its plans to acquire Level 3 Communications for $34 billion. CenturyLink ends up being the majority shareholder. Their shareholders own 51%, so Level 3 becomes a subsidiary. That transaction required approval by a bunch of folks: state public service commissions, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the FCC. That took a while. Final approval came on October 30th from the FCC, which was the last entity to approve, and then the transaction closed the following day on November 1st. So for those guys, now the hard work really begins. They're tasked with achieving just a ton of synergies from the merger, and that's what they're going to be working on in the short term. One of the things that's noteworthy is that they've announced that CenturyLink and Level 3 plan to combine their separate software-defined network and network function virtualization-based initiatives to collectively help satisfy the needs of the large enterprise customer. There are certainly some benefits for large enterprises. Key will be the new entity will be a more formidable competitor to the legacy Big Two. Level 3 began, many folks know, as a carrier's carrier, so they have a large fiber network in place that is combined with CenturyLink's, adds approximately 200,000 route miles on top of what CenturyLink had in place already. Level 3 is also known for large build-outs and the ability to reach a lot of buildings on net, and the merged entity has experienced a 75% increase in the number of on-net buildings. That should translate to lower cost for the enterprise buyer. Our observations in the marketplace recently is that CenturyLink has been very aggressive in terms of the offers they've put out on the table for pricing and commercial terms during the merger period. And Level 3 has always been a leader in that same area. So hopefully this means continued competitive price pressure lower in the marketplace. Second benefit, large solution scale from the combined entity, and hopefully that means they'll achieve greater market share and they'll earn the confidence of large businesses by meeting the sophisticated requirements that large business enterprise buyers have. So hopefully a better job trying to meet those needs and therefore be scale that can be leveraged for the benefit of large corporations. We do have areas of concern. Obviously, if you're sending an RFP out in the wireline space, there's going to be one less competitor to respond to that. But another concern is that the mid-market heritage of both CenturyLink and Level 3 in particular, means one must work harder to educate them to the expectations of large enterprises when it comes to key requirements that you'll need in your deal, such as contract flexibility, support, and service levels. The needs of the large enterprise are not second nature for them, so you'll need to do some work to help get them to where you need them to be in the negotiations process.
So you mentioned the Big Two, one of those Big Two being AT&T. So how is AT&T's acquisition of Time Warner looking?
Well, as of this morning, it looks like it might be on life support. The breaking news that came late yesterday afternoon is that the Justice Department filed suit to block the takeover. They have a concern that the proposed merger will concentrate too much control over the media landscape in the hands of one company. AT&T vows to turn this into a cage match and fight it out to the bitter end in court. We'll see whether that truly is the way it happens or not. These things tend to be settled before it's ultimately decided, but that remains to be seen. Very similar to CenturyLink and Level 3, this deal has a pretty long tail on it. It was announced back in October of last year, just like CenturyLink and Level 3. It will be one of the largest media deals ever. Only to this time, only AOL Time Warner was larger. What's interesting about this particular transaction is that historically, this type of vertical integration combination where two companies in different industries complement each other, that's really been challenged. Perhaps new ground is being charted here for companies that don't normally compete against each other, and perhaps that's driven by factors reflective of the times, whether they be economic factors, political factors, etc. The recent twist in the progress of this is certainly abrupt. We've been almost a year since this was announced, and there's been hardly a peep about it in terms of newsworthy information that would be controversial or even non-controversial. So it's certainly sudden the way this has come up in the 11th hour, it seems. For the large business enterprise, it's hard to anticipate at this point what direct impacts would be seen from the merger. A lot of the landscape that's being discussed is in the consumer marketplace, subscription television service, video entertainment content, etc. But one thing we do note is that, like its industry competitor Verizon, it seems AT&T always wants to be something other than what it is. They are certainly a world-class provider of global network services, but they have undertaken a long line of transformative efforts in numerous areas, including computing. Anyone who remembers NCR knows how that turned out, through phases with strategic cloud services, Verizon with Terramark, and now moving on to media, AT&T's DirecTV acquisition, Verizon's combination with Yahoo. Some of these transformative initiatives have met with modest success. Others have been major failures. So for the enterprise buyer, you just have to be aware that it seems like the focus is always on something other than where you would want it to be. Risks to network services customers would be distraction during this time, a loss of focus. They tend to be focused on what they want to be and closing these transactions instead of the services that you're buying from them. Perhaps reduced infrastructure investments in things that you would like them to invest in. Instead, there will be investment in things that they're focused on in conjunction with the acquisitions. Perhaps scaled back resources on the sales and account support team side as they transition from where they have people supporting what they're providing today to getting people to support their future endeavors, and a bit of a who cares attitude in terms of the things you need them to do versus the things that they want to do and focus on. Stay tuned. Only time will tell where this merger ends up, but it's certainly an abrupt change from what's happened over the last year.
You know, as I teased in the opening, and as you just described with the AT&T deal, not all M&A is turning out as expected. You know, it was pretty well known that Sprint and T-Mobile were in active talks to merge, but then at the end of last month, end of October, they both officially said that the talks were off. So now Sprint, subsequent to that, has announced that they're planning to invest heavily in their network, and they've also struck a deal with a regional cable company known as Altus, where Sprint's going to use Altus for connectivity between the Sprint cell sites, and then Altus will be able to resell Sprint using the Altus name. You know, to me, it's always felt like 3 strong wireless providers is really all you need in the United States. Frankly, in most countries around the world, you don't have 4 strong wireless providers. So I could still see Sprint and T-Mobile doing something, maybe with each other or maybe even with a cable company. What do you think?
Perhaps we will see that come to fruition. There's certainly been a lot of press over the last several months about Sprint and T-Mobile and the various alternatives that are available to them. There are a couple of segments in the communications industry that are ripe for consolidation. We've seen in the TEM space, we've seen Tango go into hyperdrive over the years, and they've gobbled up most of their competitors in that space. Interestingly, they're paying the price for that binge currently by themselves being the target of a merger with a Sentinel, another TEM provider that's part of a major acquisition by an equity firm, Marlin Equity Partners. Now we're seeing the SD-WAN market starting to consolidate. Last week, VMware announced they were acquiring VeloCloud, which was one of the leading small startup providers of SD-WAN services. And not too long before that, Cisco acquired Viptela, which was another early leader in providing SD-WAN services. As my TC2 colleague Mark Sheard pointed out in a recent article published in the online periodical No Jitter, we can expect this acquisition trend to continue in the SD-WAN space. A number of leading periodicals and online publications are projecting compound annual growth rates at almost 70% over the next 5 years for this space. So large established industry players like Cisco and VMware will snap up the up-and-coming SD-WAN providers, so there's probably more to come in that area. This probably doesn't bode well for competitive market dynamics in terms of hopes for continued downward pricing trends and lower cost solutions. Anyone who's been to the table with Cisco in a negotiation knows how challenging the negotiations can become for market leading pricing and commercial terms. We see Cisco pushing hard to change its business model of being just a producer of big iron routers, switches, hubs, etc. They've also announced recently that they're acquiring BroadSoft, a top provider of unified communications as a service or UCaaS services. Another merger that took place in the UCaaS space was Sonos combining with Genband. The new company is called Ribbon. I don't know who dreams up these names, but if your name was originally Genband, you might want to be called Ribbon too.
You know, what I find interesting is that as SD-WAN gains mindshare and as our clients start looking at hybrid WAN solutions, broadband services, dedicated internet service, it's really becoming a bigger part of their network ecosystem. And I think GTT, as an example, they probably see that same trend because they've really been amping up their broadband aggregation and SD-WAN offerings, not just in the U.S., but also around the world. Now, this year, for example, they've acquired Perseus, Transbeam, and then recently Global Capacity. Anyway, so Jack, before I let you go, do you have any thoughts on why there's been so much M&A activity in the comms industry, or is this just the new normal?
So much for the traditional softball last question for the guests. Thanks a lot, Joe. Kidding aside, I wish I knew the answer to that million-dollar question. I don't have a crystal ball, but my gut tells me that the trend may be closer to the beginning of a new normal versus just a period in time when M&A activity is popular. There's certainly lots of past examples of trends where pendulum swings over time have been observed. For example, outsourcing versus insourcing, single global provider of network services versus regional best-of-breed models, corporate liable wireless devices versus bring your own device, etc. But I suspect that the maturity of the network services marketplace and the related, particularly limited opportunities for growth in that space will continue to factor into these decisions. These forces may drive ongoing efforts by the service providers to seek opportunities to either vertically integrate, assuming that the transactions can be approved and pass muster, move into new areas, or gain economies of scale through the synergies of combining businesses, such as through mergers and acquisitions. So to coin an old phrase, if you don't like the weather, just wait for tomorrow.
Good stuff. Thanks, Jack. And thank you to the audience for listening. At TC2 and LB3, we support clients through the entire telecom and ICT lifecycle. So please check out our website, follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn, shoot us a message, or give us a call.